Hello and welcome to our round two weekly review show for the 2024 Guinness Men's Six Nations Championship here on the KLNS Rugby Podcast. After a fantastic weekend, we have an excellent panel ready to run over the highlights and lowlights of the second round. Joining me tonight, we have two returnees. Rejoining after their prior appearances, we have Jeff Neville and Iestyn Thomas of the Provincial State of Mind and Osprey's Erie podcast, respectively. So welcome back, lads.
How are you keeping?
Good. Now, Jeff, thank you very much. And yourself, Iestyn, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all good. Yeah, so it's nice to be talking about rugby. For those who have listened to the Ospreys Ivory podcast, there's quite a couple of tangents in there, but that's all fun. So it's always nice to switch back in a way. Obviously, you're someone that wants to be a journalist, so yeah, it's nice to talk some rugby.
So the only caveat we can put in is there wasn't a huge amount of rugby played on Saturday for all the games that were on, but could be worse. At least they were action packed in their own way. And we'll start with Sunday afternoon's action as Ireland took care of business in Dublin against the Italians. Tries from Jack Crowley, James Lowe, Jack Cohen, and Calvin Nash, and two for player of the match Dan Sheehan helped the home side to consecutive bonus point wins, coming out 36-0 victors. Jeff, I'll start with yourself. Like so often these games, they're swept under the carpet due to, kind of a bit of hubris towards Italy in particular. But when you look at how the new combination shone, defensive clean sheet as well for the first time since 1987 or something, the result kind of felt more impressive than even the scoreline suggested.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think anybody taking Italy, probably not at face value, are doing them a disservice at the moment. Like we saw what they did against England there last week or 2 weeks ago now, whatever it may be. But they're getting their systems in order. I suppose they've a new coach coming in, etc., who want to put his own stamp on it. But I think, unfortunately, given what we know they can do and what they're capable of doing there on Sunday, they weren't allowed fire a spark. I think that's probably the biggest compliment we can pay Ireland is if you look at Italy's set piece, the scrum was bombed, the lineout was bombed, the first phase ball, regardless of where they had it, wasn't they didn't have front football off first phase, etc., which just makes it really difficult to play. 2 22 entries, and the second one was 18 minutes into the game. So I mean, they're going over an hour without touching the Irish 22. So in my eyes, anyway, you can look at all the players, etc., and you can say that they all did well because they did. But biggest winner probably for me at the weekend was Easterby. There's an awful lot of talk about his defensive system, etc. But if you look at the last 12 Six Nations games and you look at tries scored, Ireland have less than half the next best competitor for tries conceded. I think it's they've conceded maybe 12, or is it the last 10 games? Is it
12 in the last 10 to
10 games,
France's
yeah.
27, I think it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that speaks for itself. And even if you just look at their discipline as well around the pitch, like in terms of, I know O'Mahony got a yellow card there against France, but in general, their discipline around the pitch is very, very good in terms of their own commanding of the offside line, etc. So overall, I think the biggest winner is probably going to be Easterby there. You look at the game that Crowley had was very good. Baird was very good. McCarthy again was very good. But you could literally look at every player there who lined out on Sunday and pick out positives for them. I felt McCluskey really took his chance well. I think people who don't watch Ulster maybe might have been surprised by what McCluskey can bring. Maybe even people who haven't been watching McCluskey play for Ireland in the last while, because he hasn't put a foot wrong for Ulster or Ireland in the last, I don't know how long, but felt he was very good. So yeah, overall, yeah, the players delivered, etc. in what was a very flat game. It was kind of tough to watch at times because you were waiting for a spark, and maybe that try that was disallowed would have given that spark that was so desperately needed. But ultimately, yeah, it was business as usual, I suppose, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was that kind of sense to it. And I think the fact that they raced into that early, what was it, 12 or 19 point lead early in that first half, you did feel like they're just going to go through the motions and get it done. But there were more impressive aspects to it. As you said, the likes of Stuart McCluskey, thought he combined really well with Robbie Henshaw as well. Ryan Baird went really well. Joe McCarthy again, Jack Crowley again. And that's kind of what we wanted to see. And it kind of brings me on to our next point, Iestyn, because so much to talk, but here and abroad has been about Ireland's newer players, Jack Crowley chief amongst them. But himself or others, who impressed you on Sunday in green?
Yeah, I thought Crowley he had a good game in Marseille the week before, and everyone thought, could he back that up in a way? I think
Yeah.
that was like the main outcome for this one, and he certainly did. I think he's now got a trademark with that pass where he looks out the back and plays a short pass to the to whoever's on his outside. He's running a quite a hard line. So yeah, I thought Crowley was very good. I've been a big fan of Stuart McCloskey for quite some time. You know, even by watching everyone else today, you think, oh, he's a very good rugby player, not just because of his size and what he can do. And then you've obviously got mentions to the pack there. Ryan Baird, I thought he had a good game of six. Probably, maybe stood out a bit more in a way for an own individual performance. And then you got someone like Joe McCarthy, who's just one really big second row, and I think he's got a top potential about him in the next few years. And I thought the scrum went well. Full credit to Andrew Porter, full credit to Finlay Beadham, who scrum as well in that first half. But it was more of a collective effort by Ireland in a way, and they did really well to shut Italy out, because at times Italy are a really dangerous side. I know they made a couple of changes, like bringing Tommy Allen down to the bench and making a switch of scrum half, but it's still really impressive to nil someone in the test match. You don't see that much often, especially in the Six Nations. So it's probably a disappointing element behind Italy's performance on a whole. But I thought Ireland were really clinical to begin with, and then they did really well defensively to shut them out.
Yeah, and that's it. They kind of stopped them at source as well. Like I think, like Paolo Garbisi had something like 12 carries in the game, but it's not that he meant to carry the whole time. Sometimes there was just that shooter in his face, and the best thing you can do is just recycle the ball and go from there. And like a lot of Baird and McCarthy's work. No, I was in the stands and I haven't got a chance to watch it back, so obviously it changes. But a lot of their good work was just being defensive shooters and just being a nuisance at times like that and getting in Italy's faces. And even, a lot got said about the kicking game at the start of the game, but Ireland didn't kick loosely in a way that Italy could attack from either, with the likes of Capuzzo back there, Montejoane. They didn't really have a sniff. And Ireland ultimately, they won the territory battle, they won the ruck battle, they won the set piece battle. And all in all, it did lead to that convincing win. But as well as that, as you said, the defensive shutout as well, which was crucial. I think Italy's last visit to the Ireland 22 was something like the 15th, 20th minute or something like that, which kind of says it all, really. But Jeff, we kind of focus on the individuals and all that, as always, because as he said, Stuart McCloskey was one who stood up. Robbie Henshaw as well had another good game at 13. And because of injuries to, say, Hugo Keenan or the returning Gary Ringrose, there's probably a few selection decisions that they could maybe be having a bit of a headache on. I know it's early days, but do you think if Hugo Keenan's ruled out, firstly, who do you see coming in? And do you see Robbie Henshaw holding on to the jersey at 13?
If Ringrose is fit, I see him coming back in, to be honest with you, because he's just a defensive captain. And like if you this is just my own thoughts, but I think if you have Gary Ringrose fit, you select Gary Ringrose. He's just so good. It means that I think if Ringrose is fit, if Ringrose was fit, I should say, I think we would have seen a centre at 23 at the weekend rather than another back three player, but it wasn't to be. I think if Keenan is hurt, we'll probably see. Jesus, yeah, that's a tough one. Who'd you put in at 15 if Keenan's not playing? Because Hansen's not there either. He was probably next in. I was thinking
Frawley.
Frawley, yeah, actually, yeah. It's actually funny that Frawley didn't get played against Italy as well. You would have thought that he would have got time, especially if they're looking at Budden in the new 10, etc. But I don't know. Listen, not the new 10. Crowley's the new 10, but like if you're looking at your depth, etc., and where you want him to play, it seems that Frawley can't really get a nailed down position for Leinster or Ireland, be it 10, 12, 15 or whatever it may be. But yeah, Frawley's not a bad shout. I don't know if starting him at international at 15 is going to be fair, but yeah, it's a funny one because, like, I mean, your best player at 15 is Keenan and your next best is a half fit Keenan. So hopefully it's not too serious, but I don't think there will be too many selection headaches, to be honest, because when you look at what Farrell does, it's very much money in the bank. It's very much tried and trusted. And like if we were going into a Grand Slam game tomorrow, you could probably name 22 out of the 23. Maybe one guy, they might go 6-2, which I doubt, but like maybe that 23rd player mightn't be who you think it is, but you could pretty much name it. And I very much believe that Ireland are in win now. Like they're going for back-to-back Grand Slams. Like they mightn't talk about it, or they might say, "Oh, we're not thinking about it," but Jesus Christ, they definitely are. Like, so it's very much a win now situation. So I don't see too much experimenting. I think if we were going to see it, we would have seen it against Italy. People are talking about Wales as if to say like, "Oh well, Wales are one of the weaker teams in the tournament," but they've lost 2 games, granted by a total of what was it, 3 points. So like I wouldn't turn around and be like, oh, like I wouldn't turn around and be like Wales is a given, not by any stretch, because even sure when they were, what was it, 26 down or 27 down against Scotland, they still put the shits up them, like and then they did very well against England too. Just that blitzty kind of got them in the end, but it'll be very interesting to see what happens against Wales. I think they'll go as locked and loaded as they can. So for me, if Ringrose is fit, Ringrose will be in there. If Keenan's fit, Keenan will be in there, and if he's not, I don't know. Do you put Nash back there? Maybe. There's definitely someone I'm forgetting about now. That someone who's listening is like
there's Stockdale and Larmer, as well as the other wings in the squad that have played 15 at international level.
Larmer under a high ball wouldn't be hectic,
especially with Cam Winnett in great form, and we'll probably get on to him later.
Yeah. Do you put Stockdale back there? Again, defensively hasn't been lighting it up in the last season and a half or so. So, yeah, to be honest, I don't know. Kaelan, I could just make you up the answer, or fluff it out some more, like I'm probably already doing. But I very much think if Ireland have a full clean bill of health, that they will go with that. But I think an interesting one for me as well will be the second row. Like, does McCarthy start alongside Byrne again? I think so, to be honest. I think Ryan will be on the bench again. And Cian Healy probably comes back into sub loose head again, I'd reckon, which again is another worry. Probably one of the most questioned but least answered worries that we can probably talk about.
Yeah, there's definitely that. And it's funny you mentioned the bench there as well, because I was thinking of this for my own content coming up during the week, and it feels like I do agree. I think you can name the Ireland 23 for the most part, but at the same time, if you said to me that we're going with Baird and Henderson and Jeremy Luckman as 3 of the guys on that bench, I'd be like, yeah, they'll do absolutely fine. Because in fairness, they are putting their hands up. It's just you need to do a bit more than just put your hands up. And sometimes you just need to get a bit lucky to break into a 23 that's as settled and as competitive as that Irish one as well. And it's a great position to be in that regard, isn't it? Because ultimately, if you've got, like, centre as a prime example, 4 potentially world-class centres in great form, and who gets in is more about who was there the week before or who's injured or whatever.
I think if you're looking at the centres alone, your starting centres is Aki and Ringrose, to be honest. You like the way Aki's been playing the last while. You can't leave out like if you're going full strength, like you wouldn't leave out a fit Bundy Aki. Like you couldn't.
No, you really could. I think he's probably the most. You see, it's funny because I think on the eye, Bundy's probably more nailed on, but like obviously Kerry Ringrose is probably a vice captain. He's a defensive captain. These things mean way more than what we see in the 80 minutes on the field, as well as that. But we do have other games to run through, because we'll talk about Ireland Wales maybe a little bit later on. But probably most of the headlines of the weekend were in Murrayfield, where Scotland needed a last minute, or France needed a last minute TMO intervention to claim a second win in their last 6 in Scotland. Louis Bielbiari's late try proved decisive as the visitors overturned a game-long deficit. Yes, and I'll start with yourself this time. Like, it was, hate to use the cliche, but it was a game for the purists for the opening 60, but it was heart in the mouth stuff at the end, and ultimately neither team really deserved to win, but someone had to, and it was France by the slimmest of slim margins.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it's quite hard where you go first when trying to look back at that game. Obviously, you've got the TMO decision, but I don't really want to discuss that because everyone else
Same.
across the planet has discussed that over the last couple of days. But I think with Scotland, and I'm currently writing a piece about this now, funnily enough, they took their first try by Ben White really well. Really good try. It comes off a box kick, which Jelly Ben knocks on. Scotland play 3 phases and Ben White scores. And you're thinking they've done that really well. You know, the French discipline's quite poor. They were giving away a couple of penalties. Antonio gets himself sin binned. And you're thinking there, 13-3 with a man in the sin bin for the next 10 minutes, surely you got to take 3 points. Or if you want to go for the jugular, go for the tap and go because you've got a strong carry to get a bit of momentum going, and then the pack can maybe do the rest of the work. But going for the scrum is probably the least ideal, except for maybe if you were kicking the touch and just in case the ball kicked dead. But going for the scrum, you know, it's a bit of a lottery in a way with is the referee going to call a free kick? Is the referee going to call a penalty? And Dorian Aldegheri is a fine scrummager in his own right. Just because they've lost Antonio, I'm sure I can't remember what exactly they did, but obviously Aldegheri came on and, you know, France won the scrum penalty with it. You felt at that stage, if it was 16-3 going into halftime, you've got 2 scores and you've got a little bit more flexibility in the second half. But going in at 13-3 with a bit of confidence on the French side after winning that scrum penalty, you're thinking there's still something to come in this game. And Biellery takes his try superbly. Obviously, a little bit of debate with the last pass from the Garek, who I thought came off the bench and played rather well for a young scrum half. But you know the chip and chase is very, very good and just about, I'd say, France is the victory, mainly because Scotland didn't take their chances in the second half.
Yeah, you see, that's the thing. Like Scotland they had France on the ground ready to be killed off, and they just refused to put their foot in the throat. It felt like, and even like I was going to get into this anyway, Jeff, because last week we criticized Scotland for probably not shutting up shop and being a little bit naive and going for the kill. And this week, when they probably just needed to be a little bit patient, they kind of shut up shop entirely and probably too much. And you look at like the Dupont rule kick tennis that ensued. They were not going to say afraid of what France would do, but they didn't want to play into France's hands too much, and that's understandable. But because of that, eventually, when France found a spark, like they so often do, they've done for 20 odd years, 30 odd years, that ended up being Scotland's downfall because they just couldn't break down the French when it mattered. Then they kind of ran out of time a small bit.
It's almost like Scotland stopped playing. They got to a place where they went ahead and said, okay, let's just protect this rather than continuing what they had been doing that got them there to begin with. It was, to me, when France went ahead, I couldn't understand how, like, it was a well taken try, don't get me wrong, like, but I couldn't understand how Scotland had allowed that to happen. Like, the thing that gets me about Scotland is that how long have they been developing this team, etc., etc. And to be brutally honest, like under Townsend, etc., they've got nothing to show for it, like nothing. And in Six Nations, like there last year, they won the first 2 games for, I don't know, either the first time or the first time in a very long time. I don't know what it was, of the Six Nations. You look at their World Cup, pretty much a disaster. You look at their game against Wales, second half there last week, disaster. You look at this game against France, first half, they did a lot of stuff well. They did, like, some things poorly, but a lot of stuff well. But you look at that second half against France and you think to yourself, we have France at home on the ropes. Now, you said it already, not taking those 3 points was fucking, like, what are we doing here? Like, I know sometimes you feel that you have a team on the ropes, etc. But like, the best way to beat a team is just keep those threes ticking over and over, especially just before halftime. So for me, there was just watching Scotland and what they were doing. and just refusing to play the way they had been playing that got them there. Like, what do you say about it? Like, do you say, oh, we came close? Do you say, oh, we did really well, etc.? But like, did you? Like, I don't know. I just think when you look at the talent that Scotland have, they're underachieving so much. And that for me was just another example of, like, you can say, okay, that last try should have been a try, or non-try should have been a try. And I get that, like, but at the end of the day, it wasn't. It's kind of like being on it's kind of like giving up a lead and then hoping your kicker will kick a 55-meter at the end of the game, like, or like allowing the ref to be in there, allowing it to hinge on a ref's decision when France, ultimately bar one score, didn't really fire a shot for the entire game. They were making so many errors. One thing that really ground me actually was in the build up to their score was Penno. I don't know if you remember it, but like, he very clearly knocked that ball on, but it was just like called back, whatever, and played on. Again, swings and roundabouts. You know, you get away with some of them, you don't with others. But even then, Scotland had done so much to get themselves ahead to just stop playing and then allow France just to take that game. I don't know. Like, I just think when you look at the talent they have, how long they've been together as an international squad, like coaching and players, like, if you're not putting that kind of game away, when should a team fear you? You know, like, when should you kind of say, okay, and even like we could relate it back to Munster, like in Ulster and Leinster, or sorry, Munster and Leinster. Like, there was a stat there before. I think it was Ross Byrne had lost one game in 11 or something against Leinster, and you're just like, well, at what point does he start? Like, why would he be afraid of Munster? Why would he be worried about having to go to Thomond Park when he just fucking wins anyway? Like, so it's kind of like the same with Scotland. Like, at what point, like, you'll respect the opposition, but at what point do you start fearing Scotland? At what point do you like, okay, Scotland are coming to town, etc.? We're properly worried about this rather than just respecting what they could do. Because for me, they should have achieved an awful lot more at this stage and just haven't. And that might sound harsh. And if there's a Scottish listener listening, like, I'm already blacklisted from the weekend anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. But it's just when do you expect more? Like, even if you are a Scottish fan, like, when do you kind of look at it and say, do you know what, we should be doing more?
Yeah, no, that's kind of true too, because like, you look at the World Cup, the stat that I always come back to is second half against South Africa, first half against Ireland, they're outscored something like, 40 points to 3 over an 80-minute span. That just can't happen. Like,
like, you look at that game against South Africa as well. Sorry to cut across you, but like, their breakdown was a nightmare. Like,
yeah,
like an absolute nightmare, and they just didn't fix it. So again, something that's obvious is that, like, the key part of the game, like, if you're losing your breakdown, you lose the game, and it was a very obvious what needed to be fixed, and it wasn't. But anyway, we move on.
that's true. And yes, and I'll come to you before we wrap up this game, because like, both sides, as we mentioned, they're both on one win, but like, feels like everyone's vibes on France are very much down. Everyone's on Scotland is, well, they're up in anger in a different way, but that's beside the point. But like, it's hard to know. It's hard to know where these teams are at. And like, personally, I think they're both underachieving relative to the first two games we played. Where do you think they are? Do you think they are still in proper contention?
I think Scotland are underachieving. I think mainly because I think they probably don't know how to maybe seal out a game. They can probably find a way to maybe win the odd narrow game, but when chances arise, like in the game against Wales in round one where they were 27-0 up, and they nearly let that lead slip. And then when you have such a good chance to go 2 scores in front against France, then you don't get points, and then second half it all goes a bit pear-shaped. So it's really tough to see where Scotland are at the minute, because they've shown really good encouraging signs, and then on the other hand they're letting leads slip. With France is a little bit trickier because you've got a real good talent of players. but obviously they've got new coaches. There's a new attack coach there. There's a new line-out coach there, and those are probably the two biggest weaknesses of their game at the minute. Despite having a brilliant back line, you've got the likes of, even without Dupont and Tamak, you've still got really good players like Jalibert, Penaud, Jonathan Dante's won the last two Champions Cups. And you just think, surely that's going to click sooner rather than later. So it's going to be interesting to see what France are like near the end of the tournament, especially in attack and especially in the line out. But yeah, at the minute they're both kind of underachieving in the way. But I kind of see more of a potential with France because they're obviously trying new things with the new coaches. Where you've seen with Scotland, who've had quite a similar coaching staff, quite a similar playing group for quite some time now, and obviously something's not clicking fully.
Yeah, no, I do think that's fair, to be honest. And I remember just on France's attack, it has been a little bit blunt at times. And I remember this time last year during the World Cup, Simon Zebo did a piece on their structured attack, piece of analysis for RTE, and he kind of just said like, it's not really about the structure, and like that's fine until it's not fine. And there are games like this where you do just want to have something that you can kind of fall back on instead of relying on Peno, or as it turned out, was his other Bordeaux team at Bialbiari coming up with the moment of magic to win it. And maybe that was an element of the World Cup quarter final in particular as well. Maybe they are too reliant on that magic and that spark that is so often coming from Antoine Dupont. But only time will tell. They have Italy next. You'd imagine they'll get the win there before they head to Cardiff in round 4. Scotland, on the other hand, they have to beat England. They have to back it up now, and they have to show that this loss was more fluky rather than anything else. But it's going to be tough. England are a tough team to beat, as Wales proved, because on Saturday afternoon, the age-old rivalry between England and Wales was renewed, but a classic. It was at Fraser Dingwall and George Ford proved the heroes for England with a late try and penalty respectively, as Warren Gatland's Wales were left with just another valiant loss. And yes, and I'll start yourself again. Always great to have outside perspective, and as a Welshman, it has been a tough year for Wales. But to be fair, they fought hard, they stayed close. Do you think they can take a lot away, or from your own Welsh perspective, what do you take away from this game?
I'm glad the question is just about the game compared to the last year of Welsh rugby's endured, if I'm being brutally honest.
We
But
don't have enough time for that.
yeah, we could be here all night if that was the question. But yeah, if you look at the scoreboard, it reads another defeat, similarly to the Scotland game. But there's still shoots of encouragement amongst that young Welsh side. There's been a lot of chat from both camps about how both sides are in a different rebuild, but you kind of see more of it with that younger Welsh side. Obviously, with England, you've got quite a lot of experience. George Ford, Joe Marler, bringing off Ellis Genge and Dan Cole off the bench, where Wales are bringing off and uncapped Archie Griffin from the bench for his Test debut. So you can kind of see maybe a little bit more encouragement from a Welsh perspective from that Welsh side. Someone like Cam Winnett, who you just mentioned previously, that's his 17th professional game of rugby. Very similar story to Harry Patterson, the Scottish fullback. That I believe the weekend was his 9th. So, both those two fullbacks have done really well stepping up to the international scene with such little game time on the professional stage. But I thought Winnett again was very good. Alex Mann was quite solid. Obviously, he's got a knack for scoring tries on the international level, which is encouraging to see. And at times, Wales did really take advantage of that England blitz defence, obviously now under Felix Jones. But there was probably the odd opportunity where Wales could have taken. There's a break which Cam Winnett makes during the second half, and you kind of think if Josh Adams puts that pass inside or puts a grubber kick through, you think that looks like a try. And obviously he tries to beat the on-rushing English defender who tries to give an offload back into Rio Dyer, who can't quite catch the ball. And then a couple of minutes later, after a scrum, Josh Adams drops the ball and England have a scrum just outside the Welsh 22. And, things like that really swing it, especially in a test match. And I think it's probably the difference between the two fly-halves as well. Nothing against Johan Lloyd. He's been, in fine form for the Scarlets all year, despite them playing quite poorly. but a brilliant running threat. But I think Ford kind of showed him what it was like on the international scene in a way. You know, the 50-22 he puts in with about 10 minutes to go is a brilliant piece of skill. And then from that, Grady has a deliberate knock on, and there's 3 points, which was the difference in the end. But there's one slight detail from the first half where the ball goes out the back to Lloyd and he tries to take a step, trying to evade the defender in the way. And then if you look at the clip from the Grady yellow card, you just see Ford gives them passes just by standing still. And you think if the difference is in that if Lloyd had just stood still, okay, there's probably differences in where they were on the field. I think Lloyd is in his own half at the time. But if he just stood still, similarly to what Ford did, could have created a better attacking opportunity in that particular example. And Ford just kind of like showed him the ropes in the way of what a top level, rugby player that he was. And, in my opinion, I thought Ford should have won man of the match just by his contribution of keeping England in the game, forcing the kicking battle. And their experience kind of showed in the final quarter.
And experience is crucial. And, we'll get on to kind of bringing it back to Ireland in a minute, but a point was made on the BBC pod today, Iestyn, about, Wales. They made a lot of changes for this fixture last year, famously. They made like 10 changes for this game. This time around, it was something like 6 changes. And it's still a very young squad, even with, Jack Morgan, Dowie Lake, young guys, of course, but, important leaders in the squad also out. It feels like a very young squad. And do you think there is an element of, if that's the Wales side that we see in the World Cup, for instance, with Bigger, with guys like that, do you think their chances of winning goes up dramatically just by virtue of that experience?
I mentioned it privately to a couple of my friends. I thought if Dan Bigger was an ITV pundit on the weekend and he was playing for Wales, I thought that might have just about been the difference between them because having international experience, Johan Lloyd hasn't played that much at 10 before this season. So it's quite interesting to see how that's going to develop over the next couple of years, and I'm sure Gatland and kicking coach Neil Jenkins will hopefully help that. And just another mention to Elliot D as well, the Dragons hooker. I thought he was brilliant for the first 55 minutes, and I felt like that substitution kind of hindered Wales in a way. Because the lineup was going well, the scrum was going okay, and even more credit to Kieran Azaraki, the Cardiff tight head prop. And they just when you saw those two subs parting way, you felt like could have kept them on for a little bit longer. Just to keep the momentum going in the set piece, and obviously with the two new people in the front row, Ryan Elias and Archie Griffin, kind of all went a little bit shaky. England started to win free kicks and penalties from the scrum, which is obviously the difference. So obviously that young Welsh side is going to learn from the weekend and learn from the Scotland game in round one. So hopefully that will maybe, and Gatland said post match, they're going to be a good side in 2 years' time, and hopefully they'll learn from those lessons and fix on those lessons, and they will become a good side in 2 years' time.
I would believe him. I know there's a lot of people down on Wales at the moment, but I do believe it. I think you look at the quality coming through. I mentioned, Lake and Morgan previously, but Daft Jenkins, Christ Shunza isn't available, for instance. But Jenkins, I thought Jenkins had a good game at the weekend, to be honest. Again, he's only 21, he's captain, he's a lot this plate, he's performing well. The likes of Cam Winnett, who's stepping up to the plate as well. Thought Rio Dyers started the tournament fantastically. Like, these are net positives. Ultimately, these are all net positives for Wales, and it'll take some time. And Jeff, like, I think it, for all the talk of, oh, it wasn't a great spectacle, it was kind of what you expected from both teams, given their identity of recent times. And just considering that Ireland play Wales and England next up in their next 2 games, what do you think we can expect from these sides relative to Ireland? And if they are to cause us problems, where do you think they'd be?
First off, I think with Wales, I'm a big fan of what Gatland said before the tournament, saying that they can win the tournament with these young players. I think it's what they need to hear. We probably, like, we all know it's probably not true, don't get me wrong. Like, there's an element of sensationalism or, media like just talking to the media, etc., about it. But ultimately, I think if you're a player, especially a young player, and you're in an inexperienced squad like that, you want to hear your coach is backing you. Like if you hear, oh yeah, you know, it'll be tough here, blah blah blah, well straight away it's going to be tough, etc. Whereas if you hear, oh well, we're going to win it, like they've really nothing to lose. Like, you know, if they lose a game, it's a young squad. If they win a game, it's geez, fair play, you've won it. So it's kind of win-win in that kind of situation. And when that second half against Scotland there in round one, they went out and played like they had nothing to lose. Like, and there's that old, I suppose, adage that pride is an awful thing, but at the same time, sure, if they lost by, you know, 40, or if they lost by one, at least losing by one, you can say, well, that was an unbelievable second half, and you can build on it. And that's what they did against England. Again, went very well. But I think against Ireland, the first thing they'll have to make sure of is that their set piece is working well. We saw there against Italy that that's what happens when you don't have a set piece. Like we kind of mentioned it already. So Wales will go heavy on that set piece and making sure it's proper, etc. And after that, then I think it's going to be a case of, well, listen, you're playing, is it the second best team in the world, second ranked team in the world? Last year's champions, they're going for back-to-back slams. Fucking go out and have a cut. And I think when a team is allowed that freedom, you know, obviously within a framework, etc., but maybe with the, you know, to have control of, or to have that freedom of doing what you want within that framework, I think that's when a team can be really dangerous. So I think with Wales and England, it's two very different threats, because Wales will have that framework, etc., but won't be sticking to it like glue. But with England, we saw what England did to us last year there in that last Six Nations game. For an hour, they were in it, and it was incredibly sticky. England are very good at stopping you from playing rugby at times, and I think that that's what they look to do. I think their defence obviously has another 2 games to bed in before that game. Or sorry, and they have another game to bed in before that, I should say. England are fourth, of course, but fourth to play, I should say. But I think that they will really, really make it difficult for Ireland to play the kind of game they want. I think they'll blitz the breakdown, which will be, that goes a long way stopping Ireland playing. That shoot up defence as well, if Ireland's second layer of attack isn't really on par, England will really look to shut that down, of course, with their wingers coming up hard. And, you know, you can come up narrow all you want, and you can shoot up narrow all you want, but an overlap is only an overlap if the ball gets out there. So if they're stopping the ball from getting out there, it doesn't matter if Ireland have 2 over or 3 over. Ultimately, England, if England can shut it down, they will. So I think it's 2 very different threats. Like I said, Wales, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's no real expectation that Wales will win this game. There's maybe a belief within the players and hopefully some of the fans that you can do it. But I mean, I think Irish fans will be thinking to themselves, Wales at home, okay, as long as we do everything well, as long as our set piece is well, as long as our structure is well, as long as we're actually on point, like Ireland's attack is very, very good. And we lauded their defence already, but their attack is also pretty good. So I think the Welsh challenge will be one of containing a team that's happy to have a cut, that's happy to play, that want to play, and have that, I suppose, that freedom to play, and that lack of pressure. Whereas England at home and Twickenham will look to shut it down. There is a bit more pressure on them, so they'll probably stick to the framework. And that, again, that blitz D, it's very good at shutting down defences. Like, I mean, South Africa won 2 World Cups off it, so you can't turn around and say that it doesn't work. It very clearly does. But it's 2 very different challenges for me. But ultimately, if Ireland get their set piece right, upset the opposition set piece, and make sure that their breakdown is on point as well, which is aggressive, which is efficient, etc., then it'll go a long way. Like, you look at that Italy game at the weekend, Ireland's attack and breakdown, over 62% of it was under 3 seconds, which is outrageous. And if they can, you know, if you look at against France, I think France was only about 51 or 52% or something like that. So if they can replicate some like what they had against France, even a bit more, etc. I certainly don't see them getting the same parity in the breakdown they did against the Italians. But if they can get their breakdown right, their set piece right, and their framework right, I do think that they'll come away with a win in both games. But again, it's two very different challenges at the same time.
Yeah, no, it is different. And yes, I might just touch on that from a Welsh perspective, heading into those games, because when we talked to Mike Petretta on our preview of the Italy game, he said, I would take a losing bonus point Dublin as opposed to a 4-try bonus point, because if you can show to yourself that you can stay in this game. And for Wales, it's probably somewhat similar. It's not the exact same, but somewhat similar, because they've shown they can stay with England and they can stay with Scotland. If they can stay with Ireland and potentially get a point, it would be huge, you'd imagine, psychologically. So how important is it that they get a performance in the next game against Ireland and potentially get more than just a performance against France in round 4? Or yeah, round 4.
Yeah, I think the important thing for Wales is they don't want this to be a blowout, like a heavy defeat. That's the last thing that anyone in Wales would probably want. They can go up there, they obviously there'll probably be fixes to the set piece. They need to ensure as well that they don't run it out from the 22 when occasionally it wasn't on. That was kind of another key issue from the England game, where Johan Lloyd is kind of caught in two minds in a bit when England were down to 13 men from that restart. But obviously it's going to be a tough challenge. Josh Adams alluded it as probably one of the toughest challenges out there, because let's not be frank. I think Ireland are probably one of the on-form best teams in the world. And going out there has always been tough. Even when Ireland haven't been firing, going to Dublin has never been easy. And Ronald Gatlin did say post-match at Twickenham that this Welsh side is in a bit of a rebuild, and I think Welsh rugby supporters do need to have a bit of patience. Because obviously it's not all going to click. They're not going to be winning a score from beating everyone. There's going to be some performances where it might not go to plan, or maybe the opposition might show their class, like we've seen Ireland do over the course of the last couple of years. So it's going to be really tough. If they can get the set piece working, probably try and maybe play a bit more risk as well. What in occasions where they can. It's really pointless trying to do it off a kickoff or a restart. Maybe when the opportunity arises, it maybe from the halfway line, or just outside the 22-meter line, you're thinking this is a time to strike. And for the first half, I thought the rolling more went well. That's another opportunity for them to try and sneak a couple of extra meters. So it's probably important to get a good performance in the Dublin. Make sure it doesn't go, crazy result like thumping. And then you've got a little bit more momentum then going into that France game. And, the old adage, which French team is going to turn up? Who knows? But I mean, I'll expect them to improve in the next couple of weeks. They got a week off and they got Italy. And then you think, they might be a little bit more cohesive as a team. The attacking patterns might work a bit more better. So they're gonna, come down with a bit more confidence. Is probably probably a big target around that France game, I'd say. So it could be a big scalp if Wales were to maybe, sneak it. I can't see them sneaking it in Dublin, unfortunately. I think that's probably a step too far for this younger crop of players. But if France continue as they are, set pieces a little bit shaky, who knows, especially in Cardiff, it could be a real, close encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully it is a close encounter at the very least, because be enjoyable. That's all we might be caring about at that stage of the tournament. But we'll finish it up tonight by discussing arguably the best game of the weekend, Friday night under-20s belter, Ireland edging out the Italians 23-22, largely thanks to a young cove wrecking ball named Sean Adogbo. Jeff, again, just an absolute epic down in Musgrave Park. Game-winning try and player of the match, both from Cork. But unfortunately for Ben O'Connor, it's his Munster teammate his name is on everyone's lips. I think everyone knows the name Sean Adogbo now after that try.
Yeah, there was a try he had for UCC that did the rounds. Was that last season or earlier this season as well?
Last
And
season, I
again,
think. Yeah,
oh, it was like he was running on fast forward. But when you're that size and that athletic, you're going to grab headlines, I suppose. But the tackle for me was probably the winger for Italy. Forgive me now, I don't know his name, but
Scalabran.
running, what was it, 70 odd meters, beating his
Yeah,
own fullback, falling over and actually catching that. I mean, I think I tweeted at the time, but I mean it, like if I did something like that in a game, I would literally walk around showing people. Like it's a shame. Well, this sounds weird, like, but I suppose we had a game there. I was at a game, the Northeast under 16 girls there played in Leinster, played, I think, was it Midlands or Southeast girls, a few weeks ago anyway. And there was a tackle like that back from one of the Northeast wingers managed to track back about 60, 70 odd meters, and they were behind by about 12 points at the time. And she managed to track back about 60, 70 meters and made the tackle and ended up getting a turnover off it, and ultimately won the game. And I remember I was talking to their coach afterwards, and he was saying, you know, oh, it was brilliant, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, listen, it's that tackle that won you the game. Like, you might have been behind at the time, but that's what won it. And it kind of had that feel as well. Um, I know Italy didn't win it, and as an Irish fan, I suppose I'm delighted they didn't. But if they did go on to win it, regardless of how outrageous their score was, or how well they built it up or anything like that, it would have been that tackle that had won that game for me. So it was certainly a moment, and I believe he's on Benetton's books as well, and they're after signing another two between Lina and Matt Gallagher as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Benetton next season between all of them playing. But it's it was a hell of a game, yeah. But I mean, a Dogbo on the wing to win that, I mean, yeah, like I think once he starts breaking through, and his older brother gets a run of time and gets a run of luck, I suppose, and injury free at that level, to have the two of them involved, it's going to be something serious to see. Yeah, no, it was a good win. I only saw it after the fact. I didn't see it Friday night at all, so I only saw it after the fact. But they're really putting it together now. I mean, Irish under 20s usually always do. Richie Murphy runs them really well. And again, we talked about freedom there, in terms of the Welsh crowd, but it's very much kind of the same with the Irish under 20s. He recognises that they're only young lads, and I suppose gives them that autonomy to be young lads on the pitch at the same time. I think he said as much after that Italy game. He said we have to remember, as they're young men, like they're only 18, 19, they will make mistakes, etc. And it's about creating an environment where making mistakes is acceptable. It's par for the course, and everyone's going to make a mistake in a game. It is what it is, but allowing them to do so and not feeling too pressured as a result of it, I think, is great too. And it probably goes a long way to the style of rugby we see them play. You're not going to be adventurous, etc., if you think that you're going to be berated for doing something wrong. So it's a credit to Richie Murphy too. But overall, yeah, it was a good game. But that tackle for me was 100% the moment of the game. Probably was. I know the Adogbo try was brilliant, etc., but that tackle was was a level above. I think if we saw that from, I don't know, Hansen, or if we saw that from a seasoned international adult player, the internet would probably blow up. So that's probably the best compliment you can give it. But yeah, it was a good win all the same, and then they march on now as well.
yeah, and just on Italy as well, because like their rise has been evident the last couple of years. Like they beat England last year, probably should have beaten France last year in the under 26 nations, and like this performance again further highlights that progression more. And like it's more than just the individual class of someone like Scalabran or the Garbisi brothers of years gone by. Like ultimately they're getting things right, and I suppose from just as a rugby fan in general, Jeff, like it's good to see. It's good to see everything starting to click on I suppose a case by case basis, or at least a step by step basis.
No, it is like the big question for me now is, when we want that to translate across to the senior Italian team. We mentioned there Benetton signed Lina and Gallagher, etc. there as well. They signed Fekitoa last year. But I think a big problem is that a number of players want to go to Benetton, not Zebra, for obvious reasons, first off. But it's also the fact that because Italy only have 2 pro teams, you're either going to go abroad, maybe, or you're not going to get as much game time as you would with Benetton. Now, if you look at Benetton, they're sitting second in URC, that's fantastic, etc. And I'm not knocking it, but you'd have to question of these young guys coming through, etc. Even if they do go to Benetton, how much time are they going to see to develop? Is that maybe a problem in regards the senior team translating across? Is that a lot of their guys aren't getting a chance to develop because they're not getting the game time because the squad sizes are so big? So it's just an interesting one in that direction. But again, it's for probably a better mind than me to discuss.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And we might just round things off with yourself, Iestyn, because Ireland play Wales obviously in the senior, but also in the under-20 in Cork in 2 weeks' time. But we probably don't know a lot about this Welsh team. So you just want to give us what we should expect from our round 3 opponents, the under-20 side of things, that is.
There's obviously, like the senior squad, there's obviously a lot of young players in there, but there's obviously, with the under-20s, there's been a couple of players who have had experiences in the URC and the Champions Cup. You got Cardiff open side flanker Lucas De La Rua, who was, he featured for Cardiff against Toulouse in the Champions Cup, which, with the state of Toulouse, that's like an international game with the amount of players that they've got in their ranks. Then you've got someone like Harry Ackerman, who's obviously had a bit of game time at the Dragons. He's the captain of the under-20s at the moment, and he's been on good form. And we've seen him a couple of times at the Dragons in the Challenge Cup and the URC. And then obviously you've got number 8 Morgan Morse, we've all seen clips of him doing the rounds. Obviously the one at Bridgend where he scores in a rather muddy field, and then obviously he grabbed an interception try for the Ospreys out in South Africa against the Lions a couple of weeks later in the Challenge Cup. So you got those 3 who have got quite a lot of regional experience behind them. I can clearly see that when they go into the 20 setup. You can see, they're all working well, they're all playing well up to that standard. Morse scored against Scotland. Ackerman's obviously their captain, and he's been playing well over the first 2 games. Maybe not the result they wanted against England, but I thought the defence was very strong, even though they did concede 28 points in the end. They defended really well on a whole, as just the England set piece kind of got on top of them. And then you've got someone like Harry Wilds, who's a young Cardiff fly half. He seems a bit hit and miss at the moment, relatively young. And he's hopefully to develop this tournament and continue playing for Cardiff Irish in the Welsh Premiership, and then obviously making that step up. But there's quite a lot of good talent there. Hugh Anderson scored against England, ran a really nice line. But you've got the trio of Morse, De La Rua and Ackerman, who are all regional experience. Then you've got someone like Johnny Green as well from Harlequins. A second row who's not afraid from getting stuck in those rolling mauls. So it's going to be quite exciting to see how he develops. But I think it could be a struggle for Wales, especially in that set piece.
Well, we wait to see. Hopefully it's another exciting contest down in Cork in round 3, and we'll be sure to look back over it again when it comes around. But we'll leave it at that tonight, gentlemen. It's been really, really enjoyable. So thanks to Jeff and Iestyn for taking the time to join me this evening. Thanks very much, lads.
Thanks for having me.
No worries at all.
And I will be back later this week with our interview with Alex Nankivell. That's also on the Red Army podcast feed right now. If you want to go and get to it a little bit earlier than it has been previewed. But anyways, that is all we have time for this evening. So if you do like what you see here, please do subscribe, leave a review. You know the gist now. It all makes a difference, apparently. And you can find the links to the lads' stuff down below as well as that. So for now, and until next time, take it easy.